For being here, we're looking at Matthew chapter 10. I'm not sure how you respond to this, but Matthew 10 is changing my life and giving me new insight into Jesus and what He has planned for me particularly, and hopefully for you as well. So we're looking at Matthew chapter 10. We're zeroing in on and landing on verse 40 tonight. And actually verse 40, 41, and 42 form a section. And there are three parts to this section, and we'll be giving those to you, which is the climax, actually, of all that He's been speaking. In other words, this is all a discourse given by Jesus starting at verse 5, marching right through. He's dividing His disciples up. He's sending them out. And the whole thing is focused on ministry. And as He is giving them these instructions on ministry, He goes into great detail, and now He comes to the climax of it, which is these three verses. And I have to say I was really surprised, shocked, moved, just gripped in my heart over the ending, the way He climaxed sending His disciples out, which tells us a lot about Jesus Himself and what He has to say to you. Jesus, bathe us tonight. Bathe us in your word. Don't let your word be information, data. Let it be your presence that just grips us inside, and not only might give us information, but reveals something about you so startling to our lives that we can't help ourselves. We're different. I haven't gone to the depth of this thing yet. I feel like I've hardly started in what you want to do in my life and where you want to take me and the closeness you want to have with me. Please, God, I've got barriers of stupidity and barriers of tradition and barriers of pattern and got all this stuff, God. I do break through. I pray Thee, please do break through. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. I'm absolutely convinced that intimacy is the name of the game. Intimacy, 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 intimacy. I think the heart of Christianity is intimacy. I think what God wants in your life is intimacy. I think the whole dream of forgiveness of sins, and I think the whole deal of all that He is trying to do in you is to bring you into intimacy with Himself. I think the reason He hates sin and can't stand it and the stuff that may be going on in your life, it's because it sets up barriers to the intimacy. I think the reason He cries, that He aches, that He won't leave you alone, that He keeps banging on your forehead is, He wants intimacy. I think the answer to every problem you've got is found in intimacy. Intimacy with Him, the oneness of His presence. If you could know Him, if He could be so real in your life, that if He could become the breath that you breathe, if He could go to the depths of your insides, intimacy, I'm just absolutely convinced. I would even go so far as to say, I think all the relational problems we have with each other could all be solved in intimacy with Him. If we knew Him, conflicts between us would melt away. Intimacy with Him. Oh, He wants to embrace you. That's His dream. That's His desire. That's His passion. That's what He's after. That's the whole deal from beginning to end, from Genesis to Revelation. It's not about a heaven thing. It's not about mansions. It's not about streets of gold. It's about intimacy. Oh, intimacy. He wants to be intimate with you. I think the answer to your financial problems is intimacy. I know that's so practical and so materialistic, isn't it? But wouldn't it be interesting if the spiritual intimacy with Him would literally change my whole perspective of what I need and how I get what I need, and intimacy being the answer. Intimacy. This whole chapter, it's amazing. He's talking about ministry. Isn't it interesting? It comes back to intimacy. He saturates this whole chapter with this intimacy thing. We talked about persecution, for instance. He talked about it. He starts in verse 16 and lays out this whole persecution thing and wolves and lambs in the midst of wolves kind of stuff. And then he gives the religious persecution in verse 17, the councils and scourging you and all of that. He just goes, families, your family members despising you and all the kinds of conflicts that are going to come that he labels as persecution. And isn't it interesting that right in the middle of all the persecution, he says, oh, don't be upset. Don't get focused on that, because the answer to all of that is intimacy. Intimacy with me. If you could just get into me and focus on me, persecution will just be okay. It'll take care of itself. It won't be any problem for you. It's the intimacy thing. Look at verse 19. And when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak. It will be given to you in that hour what you should speak. Okay, they're dragging me in. I've got to say something. What am I going to say? Don't worry about it. It'll be given to you. Well, who's going to give it to me? Oh, look at the next verse. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you. Intimacy. Intimacy. He's going to be so intimate in you, he's even going to speak through you. He's going to be so intimate in you that, hey, he's going to share his mind with you, and you're going to know his thoughts. He's going to be so intimate in you, man, that the deep inner emotional reactions of your being are going to be traceable back to him and who he is in you. You're going to be intimate in the trying hour before the Sanhedrin, before the kings, before the governors. It's going to be intimacy, man. Intimacy that's going to take you through. That's the solution. Intimacy. In fact, he goes on in that speaking idea of verse 19 and 20. He goes down into verse 27 and begins to talk about, oh, I'm going to tell you in the dark hours that you and I in intimacy, I'm going to share things with you. In verse 27, he says, what you hear in the ear, I'm going to whisper in your ear. This is going to be so close, man. I'm going to tell you. This isn't going to be education stuff. Well, read a book. This isn't going to be that. It's going to be all intimacy, intimacy, intimacy with him. And he's going to give you what you need in the hour of persecution. The answer to persecution is intimacy. What do you think took these boys through? I mean, when they're burned at the stake, when they're in a flip-by jail with a bleeding back and they're singing, this is not normal. What on earth happened to those boys? Well, they got this intimacy thing. Intimacy. Took them through, man. Intimacy was bigger than scorched flesh. Intimacy was bigger than hurting backs. Intimacy, intimacy, intimacy. He wants intimacy with you. Don't be satisfied with religious activities. Don't be satisfied with, well, that's my creed. Don't be satisfied with mental belief. Don't be satisfied with, that's the way I've been raised. Please, intimacy. Intimacy is what he wants. It's the solution. Persecution, he brings the subject up. Intimacy. Interesting, as he moves into verse 25 and begins to talk to us about sameness. See, these are the subjects he's been dealing with in terms of ministry. If you're going to minister, there's going to be persecution. What's the answer? Intimacy. So obviously the heart of ministry is intimacy, even though it brings persecution. Now he talks about sameness, which is an intimacy issue. Sameness he talks about in verse 25. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough. Hope you're not tired of hearing that. It is enough. It is sufficient. It is the dream of a lifetime. It is the cherry on top of the sundae. It's the passion of my life. It's the, I just got to have this above all other things. And what is the dream of my personal heart? What is the burn of my soul? What is the drive of my bones? It's, that I might be like him. Not imitation, like him, but so wrapped up in him, so involved in him, so intimate with him, so tight with him, that he can shape me into his likeness. That's the kind of intimacy. So intimate that I stare into his image and begin to look like him. So intimate that how he is begins to be how I am, because who he is in how I am. And I'm being produced by the very essence of who he is. That kind of intimacy. Like him like that. Not like him in I wear what he wears. Not like him in a WWJD. Like him in a, I have his attitude. I think like he thinks. I respond like he responds. My heart beats like his. Because my heart is his heart. We've gotten together in intimacy. Intimacy. See, intimacy. That's the deal. Intimacy. Again, you see it in verse 27. Whatever I tell you in the darkness, I'm going to be so intimate with you in the dark moments that I can whisper. I can tell you things. And you know what will happen when I tell you things? It'll begin to be displayed in your life in the daytime. Why? Because intimacy is so real, and as I share it with you, it'll become the fiber of your being and begin to be displayed out of your mouth, and you'll say it in the light, and it'll be displayed in the day. Wow. In fact, verse 27, what you hear in the ear, I'm going to whisper in your ear, man. This is not go to class and hear I'm going to be in the night hour whispering in your ear, and you know what's going to happen with that one? You're going to proclaim. It says preach, but it's really proclaim, which could be demonstration on the housetops. People are going to watch you, and out of you is going to be displayed what I whispered in your ear. The intimacy is going to shape you. The sameness is coming from intimacy. Intimacy, intimacy, intimacy. How did God create the worlds? Our concept, and you know how he did, our concept gets me. I get the feeling we think God got up one day, stretched, and said, I think I'll build a world today. And out got his nail apron, 10-penny nails, hammer, saw, lumber, whacked away. After 6 days, boy, those muscles hurt. I've used those for years. And took a day off. Sabbath. You know how he did it. Sat on his throne, thought with his mind, and in our language, spoke with his lips. And there was. Now think of the intimacy. Think of the intimacy. He's come to indwell me, and he's whispering words in my ear. It's become true in my life because he said it. Could I get so close to him that his creative flavor could create my life? Not a God sitting up in the sky yelling at me. I'm talking night hours. I'm talking him and I in intimacy. I'm talking about oneness. I'm talking about intimacy, intimacy, intimacy. Are you counting how many times I'm saying that? Intimacy. Intimacy. Until when he speaks, the creative force of his speaking makes me like him. Intimacy. Intimacy. It's the answer. Another subject, of course, which is the overall subject of the whole passage, is not just persecution. Yeah, you're going to be persecuted, but wait a minute. Intimacy is the answer, because ministry always produces persecution. You can count on it, he says, and intimacy is the answer. Oh, yeah, this sameness thing. Yeah, I want you to be like I am. So in ministry, what's ministry going to be about? It's going to be the display of who I am in your world. And what's the secret to that? Intimacy, intimacy, intimacy. So ministry is the deal, which is the third thing, which is the overall subject. Ministry is a product of intimacy. Come on, you know. If ministry can be defined in terms of activities, preaching, Sunday school, singing, ushering, activities, then you understand it is defined in terms of performance. Ministry is not performance. Does it matter how I treat the waitress at the restaurant? After all, I'm not preaching then, I'm not on. See, I only minister on Sunday morning. That is so performance-oriented. You can begin to sense that if intimacy is what is what ministry is all about, then it's 24 hours. It's all the time. You're always on. This ministry is when you're snoring at night, you're ministering. There's never a time off. There's never I'm out of it. It's never this doesn't matter. It always matters. It always matters. Why? Because my life is intimate with Him, and that isn't a turn on, turn off. That isn't on Tuesday night I'm intimate on the right. No, this is ministry all the time because it isn't defined in terms of activities. If ministry is defined in terms of skills and talent, then it's all about self-sourcing and self-centeredness and how well I do and how skilled I am. And I should listen to Dr. Phil more. And I could handle the crowd better. That isn't ministry. Come on. Ministry is what? Not about skill. It's about flow. It's about intimacy. It's about embrace. It's about ministry is an intangible dynamic of the flow of who He is penetrating your world. See, if ministry is defined in terms of organizational structure, then we're into politics. I love politics. If ministry is defined in terms of knowledge, then it's academic and it's figure it out and it's data but see, ministry is not about what you know or what you don't know. See, they weren't impressed about the academic scholarship of these guys. They were impressed about, I think they've been with Jesus. Intimacy. Intimacy. Now, he moves through this thing, bringing you to verse 40, and just absolutely, there is no way to get out of it, blows you away with this whole idea of intimacy in verse 40 down through verse 42. Look at this thing. He who receives you receives me. He who receives me receives him who sent me. He who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. He who receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whoever gives one of these little ones only a cup of cold water in the name of a disciple, assuredly I say to you, he shall by no means lose his reward. Now there's a threefold breakdown. We're only going to do one tonight, verse 40. But there's a threefold breakdown with the verses. First of all, there's the statement of ministry, verse 40. That's what we're going to deal with tonight. Verse 41 is the status of ministry. Do you realize it's in a progression? Do you see that? Verse 41, he who receives a prophet. Oh, that's big time. He who receives a righteous man. Well, that broadens the base a little. Prophet is one thing. Righteous men, there's more of those than there are prophets, and that broadens the base. But then he goes down to little ones and cups of water. Isn't that interesting? Goes from the top prophets to the righteous men down to little ones. The status of ministry, verse 41. In verse 42, he says, I want to talk about the stipend of ministry, the reward thing. I can hardly wait to get to that. I love rewards. My wife gives me rewards when I'm good. So I can hardly wait to get to that. We want to back up, look at verse 40. He who receives you Think about this. You got to think about this. Think this through. I missed it. I read this 100 times. I was going to say 1,000. Wouldn't be far off. He who receives you receives me. And he who receives me receives him who sent me. It's a proposition. It's a big idea. It's the theme. It's the bold statement. It's the bumper sticker thing. It's the overwhelming conclusion. Then he says, let me break it down for you. And he begins to move into verse 41 and 42. In other words, you cannot understand verse 41 unless you really get the big idea in verse 40, which controls and determines how you view verse 41. If you take verse 42 and just run off with it, you will miss the entire intent of what he's trying to say, because you've got to see it in light of verse 40, because verse 40 is all about intimacy, intimacy, intimacy. Now, what I missed in verse 40, you got to think, come on. What I missed in verse 40 is that the focus of the verse is not on you and not even on him. It's on the one we're ministering to. Did you see it? He who receives you. Who's the he? What's the guy we're ministering to? It's the nameless guy out there that we'd like to win. It's that fellow over there that we're trying to get through to. It's the guy that comes knocking on our door that we'd like to talk and get him into the... It's the fellow we're inviting. It's that guy, the guy we're ministering. They're being sent out to minister. He's dividing them up. Before you go, he says, and he gives them instruction. Here's the climax of the instruction. And the verse 40, the whole focus is on the individual to whom you are ministering to. So this is not really about you, nor is this really about him. This is about who you are ministering to. He, the one you're ministering to. Now, let's break it down. Number one, content of ministry. Oh, this will blow you away. You'd never guess this. Jesus is the content. Jesus is the content. Well, sure, he's the content. The content of ministry is the intimacy with the person of Jesus. So everything that I'm trying to do in terms of the he that I want to minister to is I want to get him in contact with the intimacy of Jesus. The whole goal that I'm after, the whole driving passion of my being, the one single thing that is the desperate desire of my heart is, I've got to get you into intimacy. I've got to get you into contact. You've got to somehow embrace him. You've got to see him. The content is Jesus. Let's take a negative approach. If you've done anything in terms of public speaking, preaching, teaching a class, giving a testimony even, it's irritating, isn't it? You work like a dog on the message. You study hard. You put something together all week long, and a handful of people come, which is just mind-boggling anyway after all the good work you did. And then a handful of people show up, and when they do show up, half of them aren't even interested in it. Some of them are texting on their phone. Some of them are getting up and going out. Some of them are on this and that. Some of them are talking to each other. Some of them are, and you're just... You feel so rejected. They don't listen to what I have to say. I'm trying to minister to them and they don't pay attention. That makes me mad. Why does that make me mad? Because the whole focus is on me and my preparation, and I've got valuable things to say, and after all, I'm intelligent and I've got a doctor's degree, and people ought to listen to me. Should go on TV. He says, get this, they're not rejecting you because this isn't even about you. He says, they're rejecting me. So what do you care? Oh, the only reason you care is, they're missing him. They're missing him. And Manley, you get all bent out of shape, and they're not paying attention. And I worked hard, and they get all bent out of shape about that. It's not you, because this isn't about you. This is about him and intimacy with him. So why do you preach? Him. Why do you have supper on Saturday night? Him. Why do you take the whip and drive the cooks? Him. They do it voluntarily. This is about him. This is about him. This is about him. The whole deal is him. This is not about programs. This is about him. This is not about singing. This is about him. This is not about pulling off a big deal. This is about him. This is about him. Him. This is about intimacy with him. What would it take to get you into intimacy? Feed you a good meal, we'll do it. Wait on your table, we'll do it. Beautify the place, we'll do it. Pick you up, we'll do it. What would it take? Because everything we do, intimacy with him. The content of ministry. Number 2, the connection of ministry. This gets harder. Pay attention. Look at verse 40. So interesting. He who receives you receives me. Oh, I like Manley. He's a handsome guy and got talent. He's got good looks too, and money too. And I like Manley. I like his sermons, and I like to be around him. But I don't want Jesus. He says that's impossible. Come on, struggle with me on this. He says that's impossible. Because Stephen Manley is to be so saturated, so dominated, so intimate, so won, so absolutely overwhelmed with, so absolutely pushy, so absolutely filled with, so absolutely shaped by the person of Jesus, that every time you get next to him, Jesus is pushed on him. And if you're going to embrace Manley, you're going to have to embrace Jesus, or you're just going to be miserable all the time. That's what he said. Because there is no way that the guy you're ministering to can receive you without receiving Jesus. Because you can't be separated from him. Now here's the way I like to operate. I got my golfing buddies. Whole group of us, we get together on Saturday. We go out and play 18 holes and spend the whole day, spend the whole morning, and have a meal together. And they're my golfing buddies. We just talk, laugh, have a big time. Oh, wonderful. Oh, got my fishing buddies over here. It's a different crowd. We fish together. We went in, got a boat together, and we just have a big time. And we're just all connected. And we love. They're my fishing. Oh, I got my. If I had a job, I've got my work buddies. over here. These are the guys I see every week. These are the guys I work with. We're all good friends. We laugh, tell jokes, hang out at noon. Get a meal together. And we're just, so I got my golfing buddies, I got my fishing buddies, and I got my work buddies. I got them. And over here, I got my church crowd. These are the people I only see them on Sunday morning, but we hang out. Yeah, and sometimes we go out for dinner together. But they're my work. They're my religious crowd. I like them. Hey, we have good time. Yeah. He says, no, can't do that. You can't slice that thing up like that. Because this is not a religious crowd, and this is my golf crowd, and this is my fishing crowd, and this is my work crowd. See, you are so interconnected. You are so filled with, you are so intimate with, you are so wrapped up in Jesus that your work crowd just... It's like your church crowd. You just keep singing Jesus in their ear and poking Jesus all over them, and your golf buddies. Some of them are quitting because it's like a religious service. And when you play golf and on your fishing, you got these guys in the boat. Where are they going to go? So you got them, man. You're just all over them. And Jesus, I'm not talking about pushing anything down their throat. I'm talking about you're just so filled with Jesus that the pressure of the wonder of who he is, and nobody can receive you on any level but what they receive him. Intimacy. It's a radical intimacy. 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 In fact, he says it's a little worse than that. Look at this. He who receives you receives me. Okay, so I'm so full of Jesus that every time you bump against me, you bump against him. And he who receives me receives the Father. Brother, we got the whole Trinity in on this. So there's no dividing this up. Do you know one of my favorite verses? This is true, Nathan. Not like Nathan's deal. Listen to this. Here's what Jesus said. At that day, talking about Pentecost, at that day, you will know that I am in the Father. And you're in me, and I'm in you. Oh, man, that's tight. Isn't that tight? That is so tight, brother. How are you? Good night, that's mixed up. I'm in the Father, you're in me, so obviously you're in the Father because you're in him, and he's in the Father. And I'm in you, so obviously he's in the Father. And if the Father's in him, and he's in the Father, and he's in you, and you're in him, and man, that's mixed up. How would you ever divide that thing out? So when we're talking ministry, it's all about intimacy. Intimacy. Content of ministry, it's him. Connection of ministry, it's him. Intimacy. Let me give you this third one. Conclusion of ministry. Now, this will not be good for some of you because there's grammar involved, brother. But grammar really matters. Look at this verse. It isn't like I thought it was. The subject, there's two sentences. You can divide it up into two sentences. If you've got my translation, here's how it goes. He who receives you receives me. Sentence one. He who receives me receives him who sent me. Sentence two. Let's deal with sentence one. Sentence one, the subject is he, the first he. He who receives you, he, subject, meaning the one you're ministering to. He. Receives is the verb, not the first receives, the second receives. He who receives you receives, that's the verb. He, subject, receives, second receives, is the verb, and the direct object is me, which is Jesus. He's speaking. So he receives me. Well, who are you talking about who receives you, Jesus? Oh, the one who receives you. He said, let me give you a little clarification. And he gives us this phrase. It's translated in verse 40. It's translated as, who receives you. That's a participle. Acts like an adjective, modifying he. So the group I'm talking about is the group that receives you. That's the he. The he, the guy who receives you. That's the subject. And he's going to receive me. Now, if you got that, did you get that? You got that. You just want to move on. Because I was going to do it again. Let me give you the second sentence. And he, subject. Again, it's this guy that you're ministering to. He who receives me receives. That's the verb. He receives. He receives. And the direct object of the receiving is me, which is Jesus. You got it? So it's the same identical structure, same subject, same verb, same direct object as in the first sentence is in the second sentence. This is phenomenal, folks. You don't look like it, but it is phenomenal. So he's saying in the second sentence, he is the subject, receives is the verb, me is the direct object. Oh, he says, let me tell you who I'm talking about in the subject. It's the guy who receives me. So that's a participle, which acts like an adjective, modifying the subject. He who receives me, that's the subject. Receives is the verb. Me, let me tell you about me, he says. I'm the one who's been sent by the Father. You got it? He, the guy who receives you, receives me, Jesus. He, the guy who receives me, who is the same guy who received you, receives me, the one who's sent by the Father. So the sentence does not say, when you receive me, I'm the preacher, I'm working on you. You receive me, you receive Jesus. When you receive Jesus, you receive the Father. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, when you receive me, the minister, the truth, you receive him, Jesus. And when you receive Jesus, you receive the whole program, the whole redemptive flow, the whole idea of the second member of the Trinity leaping off of his throne, becoming man, dying on a cross, raising from the dead, ascending to the right hand of the Father, and pouring out the Spirit. You receive that whole, you receive, which is all about the cross, by the way, you receive all that's contained in bleeding, suffering, and dying. You receive all that, see, that's who I am, Jesus says. I'm all about sent from the Father for the sole purpose of pouring my life out for others. That's my whole deal, is to embrace my world, suffer, bleed, die, win. I got to get through. I got to win. I'm driven by this thing. Can't help myself. Burn in my bones, whatever it takes. Nail me to a tree, whatever I got to do, however it's got to play out. This has to happen. That's what I'm into, because that's the heart of the Father, and I'm all into him. And if you receive me, you're going to receive Jesus. And who is Jesus? He's the cross-bearing one, and you embrace that. You know what I like? Jesus died for me and I get off scot-free. That's what I like. What is this? Intimacy. Intimacy that embraces Him, and embracing Him, I embrace all that He's about in His bleeding, suffering, and dying. Do you think that would eliminate griping? Brother. You know what the conflict was between Jesus and the Pharisees? Sure you do. It was all over this issue. They wanted a Messiah. Sure they did. They wanted a leader. Yes, they did. They wanted the fulfillment of God's promise. Yes, they did. They dreamed about it. They talked about it. It was their deal. It was their hope. They wanted deliverance. Yes, they did. But they wanted a military, computer under his arm, briefcase, double-breasted suit, tie, kind of guy. And Jesus wasn't. He just wasn't that. Why are you always dealing with the sick? Jesus said, well, they're the ones that need a physician. That's what I came for. For you folks that got it all together, didn't come for you. I came to and if I'm going to embrace Him, I embrace oh, Jesus. Intimacy. Want intimacy with you? Want joy, peace, tickles up and down my spine, warmth, happiness. I want emotional stability, peace in my mind, security of your strength. But there's no way to embrace you without embracing the fact you've been sent. Ministry. And Lord, could it be that I've spent so much of my time focused on what I need, how I feel, what's good for me, my plans, that I've missed your heart, which pours itself out for others. And therefore, I've never got around to ministry, which is your passion and is filled with your intimacy. Because I never had time. Wouldn't it be something tonight, God, if I'd take all my problems and all my needs and I would table them, I would set them aside, and in intimacy with you begin to pour my life out for others? Come back sometime when I had a little time to deal with my problems and find out they were gone. Ministry is about you. That's the content. Ministry is connection with you. Intimacy. Until no one can embrace me without embracing you. No one can stay friends with me without getting into you, because you will be so dominant in everything we're doing that they'll get in or get out. And no one can embrace you without embracing the heart of the Father, which is bleed, suffer, and die for others. Intimacy. Moments of seeking. Heads are bowed. Altars are open. Anybody arrived in intimacy? Anybody gone as far as you can possibly go in closeness to Him? Anybody here think they might be able to go up another notch in embracing His person? But in knowing that, be fully aware that if I do, He's the sent one. He will spill me out. Anybody want to know Jesus? Anybody want more than religion? Anybody want more than activities? Anybody want more than just a program? Anybody really want more than an idea? Anybody want something greater than just belief systems, but just activities because of it? Anybody really want to embrace Him? Moments of seeking. Be obedient.